we join up with Jesus in chapter 3 again. We'll begin in verse 6 here in just a moment. But we find ourselves along the Lord as he is reaching a point in his ministry where he's facing some of the most adversity and some of the biggest challenges that he has faced thus far in his public ministry. Though he is at this point surrounded by a lot of people who love him, a lot of people who are excited to hear from him, a lot of people who are interested in knowing what it is that he's doing and knowing why he is here. At the same time, there's a whole group of individuals, primarily the religious elites of the day, who were constantly making it their life's calling to find fault with him, to accuse him, to try to mitigate his ministry. Even in our last few messages that we've been here in the Gospel of Mark, we've seen those challenge Jesus in a couple of different ways. First of all, they challenged the people that he hung out with. If you remember that story, that he was with these so-called sinners and those that they deemed were unfit to spend time with, and yet Jesus sat with them and ministered with them. We talk so much about Christ's open heart to the whole world that any could come to hear the gospel. And so they criticized him for that. How dare he, this religious man, this so-called rabbi, how dare he spend time with those that have lived such an outward life of sin? And so they criticized him for that. They criticized Jesus around the observance of their practice of fasting. They challenged him about that. They challenged him about his observance of the Sabbath. And last week we talked about how Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. I mean, he created it so he can define how it's lived out. And so they attacked him about that. So they're attacking him about the people he's spending time with. They're attacking him over his observance of some of the Old Testament laws. And it got to a point, and here's what I want you to understand today. It got to a point where these religious leaders, these people who had control over the average person there in Israel, it got to the point where they were so angry, they were so upset, they were so disturbed by Christ and his ministry that they were willing to now do two things that they had never been willing to do before. The first thing is that they were willing to lay aside their political differences and work with a group of people known as the Herodians. Now, the Herodians were Jews who were sympathetic to the Roman occupiers. Now, isn't this interesting? Because wasn't it the tax collectors who were the ones who were sympathetic, or at least working for the Romans? And everybody hated them so much because they were like selling out to the Romans. But yet now we see the Pharisees coming alongside of these Herodians, these people who were actually supporting the Roman occupation, and they got together, and that's something the Pharisees would never have done. They never would have worked with them. They never would have gotten along with them, but yet we see them come together for the purpose of taking down Jesus. The other thing that the Pharisees were willing to give up was their observance of the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. And so very quickly we see here in verse number 6 of Mark 3, the Pharisees went out and they took counsel with the Herodians against him, that's Jesus. Notice how they might, what's that word? Say it with me. Destroy him. Destroy him. This was not a normal situation. This is how much they hated Jesus that they decided and were conspiring to destroy him. That means to kill him, eliminate him from the face of the earth and his influence. And I got to tell you, this was not a powerless threat. They had the ability to actually carry this out. They were serious. And so this is the framework that I want you to be in and to understand as we head into our passage today, that Jesus' life was now under threat. It had been, before just accusations and criticizing him and going after him. That's not a big deal, right? Jesus can handle that. But now there is this credible threat upon his life, and they are now ready to destroy him. And that brings us to our first thought this morning. If you're taking notes, write this down as we continue into verse 7. Notice the pressure that Jesus confronted. The pressure that Jesus confronted. Everyone, I am sure at this point, at least most people, would have known about the Pharisees' hatred for the Lord, but the passage does not indicate for us if everyone exactly knew the extent that it had now reached. This plot that had come to end this self-proclaimed Messiah. And I want us to understand that Jesus at this point is under intense scrutiny. The pressure that he would have felt would have been immense. And Jesus, understand, who is fully God and at the same time fully man, which is a wonderful thing, as fully man, he would have been feeling and certainly understood the pressure, the anxiety, or the hatred, the intensity that was pointed towards him, especially since Jesus' intentions were pure, weren't they? He came to seek and to save that which was lost. He came from a pure heart. His desire was, I'm going to die for your sins, and I come here with a pure heart, and now they're turned against him, and they want to actually kill him. Now, you and I can never fully understand the tension or the pressure that Jesus would have been facing, but I think if you've ever walked through a season in your life where you've been misunderstood, or maybe you have been falsely accused, you understand the tension and the pressure that develops in your life. Maybe some of you, like me, when you are maybe misunderstood or attacked or there's some sort of wrongful accusation, you know how much that weighs on you. You know how much it affects you. It consumes your thoughts, how it interrupts your sleep. I don't know about you, but how often I just stand in the shower staring at the wall thinking of all the arguments that I should be having in my head right now. Maybe, okay, I'm the only one who does that. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Because it consumes you, the frustration and the attacks. I mean, it just comes over you. So Jesus is facing all of this. He knows that there are those that are out there to kill him, those that hate him, those that are coming after him. And we really can't fully comprehend what it was like for the Lord at this point in his ministry. But there was a lot of demand on his time. There were physical demands on his physical body of travel and speaking. There, of course, then was this threat that was over his life. Even when he tried to find relief from the crowds that came, he was unable to find relief. That's where we pick it up in verse 7 of Mark chapter 3. And Jesus withdrew himself with his disciples to the sea. That's a common thing that would happen. More than likely, he went back to Capernaum. We've talked about that earlier on in our study. That was kind of a home base for Jesus around the Sea of Galilee. And so he went back to this area. He withdrew himself from the crowds that we had heard about earlier. But notice, a great multitude from Galilee followed him. And from Judea and from Jerusalem and from Idumea and from beyond Jordan, and they about Tyre and Sidon, a great multitude. When they heard what great things he did, they came unto him. So think about this. Jesus is under this pressure. They're after his life, and now he says, well, I'm going to go then back to my home base. I'm going to go back to where some family are, where some people are that I'm familiar with. And he tries to get away, but notice the multitudes found him. And these are not just the locals in Capernaum that had heard about the paralyzed man. They're not the ones that had seen the leper made clean, but now they come from even greater distances to come and find Jesus. These verses here give us just a small sampling, and I wanted to illustrate it for us here. So there's Galilee. There you see the Sea of Galilee is up in the north. So this is the area that he was in. We're not sure exactly if he was in Capernaum. He was on that side of the Sea of Galilee there. And so that's the immediate area. So people were coming from the immediate area. But then it also says they were coming from Judea, which is further south. It's actually more of like a provincial area, a larger area. So people are making that trip. And then it says that they're coming from Idumea. Sorry, I don't know if I'm always saying that correctly. I've just put it at the bottom because it's actually further south. This is now 200 kilometers away. 200 kilometers away now, we're hearing about people coming to see Jesus. Then they talk about beyond the Jordan, which just means the region that's on the other side of the Jordan River. And then they talk about Tyre and Sidon as well. That's about 75 kilometers north of Galilee. So we have people coming from this huge area, and they're all traveling, and they're coming to see Jesus. Now, if you've ever been sick and been on a journey before, you know how it's not very fun. You know, you ever get on a plane with a head cold, and you're just like, I just got to get through this, 3-hour flight. Imagine going on a 200-kilometer journey by foot. And so all of these people are coming to find Jesus. They had heard, as it says, of the great things that he had done. And so they were coming to be healed by him. That's what it was all about. And we've got to understand that they weren't coming to necessarily hear about his message. They were not coming to learn from his teaching. They weren't coming to bring an offering or to encourage him in his ministry. They were coming specifically because they wanted something from him. They wanted something from Jesus. Again, it's hard for us to fully comprehend what it was that Jesus was facing. But if you've ever gone through a season in your life, and I've certainly been through seasons like this, and I'm sure you have as well, where it feels like everybody wants something from you. I think dads, sometimes we feel that, We come home and everybody wants something from us. Any dads relate? Don't put your hand up. Don't anybody see, okay? All right, well, we can relate to that. It's like, man, everybody, every kid, our spouse, everybody wants something from us. We're at work. People need something from us to come home. And maybe you've been through seasons like that, overwhelmed with the demands on your time and your energy. I think you can begin to get a small glimpse of what this season of ministry was like for Jesus. No one was there to give him a break. And the pressure on him would have been intense as well. You've got to see here that the forcefulness of the crowd, of the sick and the possessed people, as we're about to read about, trying to find Jesus, people that had traveled a long way. Somebody once said that, I thought this was great. Those that have traveled far will not be denied. And if you've ever been on vacation with your kids before, you know what that's like. You know, like you go to some amusement park and you're like, the lineup is 2.5 hours. You know, okay, maybe I'm the only one again. Maybe you've done this. And you're like, I'm going to stand in this line for 2 hours because I drove 2 hours to get here and I'm going on this stinking ride, right? I'm going to go on this. And you know, it's like you're on vacation, you got your kids or family, and you're like, we're going to do this because we traveled to get here and we're going to make this happen. So imagine now someone who came to see Jesus and they're convinced he's going to heal me of my ailment and my disease. And they're there and they're not going to give up until they get access to Jesus. They're not going to give up. That's why we read about in verse 10, for he had healed many. So they came because he'd healed many before. And so much that they pressed, this is a key word, they pressed upon him for to touch him, as many as had plagues. And unclean spirits, verse 11, when they saw him, fell down before him and cried, saying, Thou art the Son of God. And he charged them that they should not make him known. Now, most of us don't like going to the mall on Boxing Day, you know, because there's so many people there. Imagine this crowd of people pressing up against him, trying to get to him, trying to touch him. The picture that I want us to understand is that this is a picture of wild disorder. This is people pushing and shoving, trying to get close to Jesus, just trying to touch him. Every one of them convinced that their disease or their ailment is worthy of being healed first. So all of these sick people are coming and they're trying to get to Jesus. And then at the same time, it says that there are those that are possessed by unclean or demonic spirits. So we got this whole group of sick people who've got physical ailments and issues, and they're trying to get to Jesus. And then throughout the crowd, there's these people that are possessed with evil spirits, and they keep calling out, You are the Son of God. You are the Son of God. Okay, this is chaos. Are you seeing it with me? I thought about, for like illustration's sake, that all of us get up and go to the fireside room and then have church in there for the rest of the time to feel what it was like. I mean, people are right on top of him. And so these evil spirits are shouting out, calling his name, which this is something that I find very intriguing, is that in that day, in ancient days, they believed if you knew someone's name or if you knew their character or had specific knowledge about them, if you called out their name to them, you then had power over them. And so it seems as if these evil spirits are identifying Jesus for who he is, and they're calling out his name to show their power over them, to which Jesus always responded, right? Don't talk, be quiet. Keep it. He would tell them every time, do not speak. Obviously, he didn't want to be validated by Satan and evil spirits, and so he told them to be silent. It's ironic to me, though, that these evil spirits knew who he was and proclaimed who he was, and yet the crowds were simply there for his healing. They wanted him to meet their needs. Now, when you put this all together, we begin a picture in our mind of what it would have been like for Jesus. The sick, the lame, the blind, those with plagues, as it talks about here, calling out, trying to touch him, demonic voices above the crowd shouting out his name, thousands of people trying to get at him. All the while, the murderous Pharisees are off to the side watching everything to see if he slips up so they can either accuse him once again, or maybe they even had people there that were looking for an opportunity to kill him. This would have been an overwhelming, stressful situation. If you and I were in that position, I know I would be freaking out at this point, okay? And I'm sure you would be too. I can't, what is happening here? But for Jesus, it was also overwhelming. You say, well, how is that possible for Jesus to be overwhelmed? Well, again, we have to remember the humanity of Christ. Kenosis is the theological word that describes this. It is described in Scripture as Christ, the emptying of himself. It was not an emptying of deity in any way, shape, or form, but he did limit his divinity. He did limit his power so that he could follow through in the Father's will. Okay, so there was this unique element, and it's not completely possible, honestly, for us in our finite minds to understand the infinite God in this area. But there was a physical limitation. He did become tired. Just like us, he needed to eat. He needed to rest. And so there was this huge demand. And you're like, well, why didn't Jesus just go all right, you're all healed. You're all possessed. Get out of here. All right, I'm going to go take a nap. Well, that just wasn't how he operated. And so he was feeling overwhelmed in this moment. The pressure was intense. And I think one of the reasons we know that is because what it tells us in verse number 9, that he spake to his disciples that a small ship should wait on him because of the multitude, lest they should, this word here, throng him means to crush. In fact, its definition means to squish like grapes. So Jesus himself was afraid of getting smashed by the crowd. Unfortunately, we read about some of this just recently with some of the soccer games that happened where people were jumping over barriers and they were rushing in. And I saw this terrible photo of like kids laying on the ground and people running over them. And so you know what panic and what intensity can do to a crowd. And so Jesus himself was afraid of getting crushed like a grape under your foot. He was worried about that. And so we see him here have a boat on the shore. So imagine here's the water behind him and there's a little boat right up behind him. To me, it's like the getaway vehicle, engine running, doors open. Jesus is like, you get ready. I don't know who's in the boat. I'm sure it's Peter, he's probably yelling at everyone like, back, get back, don't touch him, get back. And he has this little ship available, this little boat for him, and so that he could get away. It was an intense, pressure-filled moment. And you say, Pastor, why are you focusing on this aspect of Christ and his ministry? Well, one of the reasons is simply because if Jesus knows what it's like to go through pressure and difficult situations, then he can most certainly relate to the difficulties that we go through in life, the pressures that we feel. He was acquainted with our grief. He's acquainted with our sorrows. He knows and was tempted in every way like we are, yet without sin. And so the point to all of this is that I want you to know that Jesus endured this great pressure. He confronted this great pressure, but that means that he also then can relate and understand what it is that you are facing through. He can empathize with our feelings of inadequacy, of fear, of wondering if life is ever going to slow down enough to catch our breath. I realize that some of you are probably thinking right now, well, great. I'm glad that Jesus was as stressed as me right now. But that's not very comforting. That's not very comforting, and I get that. But I want you to see here as we continue that Jesus, though overwhelmed, though there was this massive humanity trying to get access to him, he does not stay in that position for very long. As often Jesus did, we see throughout his ministry, when he found himself in these physically demanding situations, when he was weak, when he struggled with strength from his physical side, he acted very decisively. And so secondly, I want you to see the peace that Jesus craved. So there was this pressure that Jesus confronted, but now there was a peace that Jesus craved. And I have one line from verse number 13, and he went up into a mountain. The first thing that Jesus did after jumping into that getaway boat is that he headed for the hills. He headed for the mountain. I don't believe for a second that this was an easy decision for the Lord. I don't think he was just like, see ya, like I'm getting on the boat and I'm taking off. No, I don't think that at all. I don't think this was an easy decision for him to leave those because his heart was for the suffering. His heart was for the hurting. He wanted to heal, but he also knew the limitations in this sense of his humanity. It was not a limitation on his ability to heal, but the physical limitation. And so what did he do? He found a place of peace. He found a place to get away from the noise. Vance Havner is well known to have said, if we do not follow Christ's example to come apart, we may indeed just come apart. I think that's a very powerful thought. But Jesus, did not just get away to sleep. He didn't just go up into the mountain and, binge watch his favorite show. He went up into the mountain and he was purposeful in redeeming the time that he was given. Now, we go to the Gospel of Luke to understand what exactly took place on that mountain. In Luke chapter 6 and verse 12, it says, and it came to pass in those days that he went out into a mountain to, say that word with me, pray. All right, don't wilt on me. Come on, guys, stay with me. Where did he go to? What did he do in the mountain? He went and prayed. And not only that, he continued all night in prayer to God. He continued all night in prayer to God. Jesus, the very Son of God, in his moment of need, went to his Heavenly Father in prayer. And I want to tell you this morning that if Jesus needed to go to the Father in prayer when the pressures of life were overwhelming, how much more do we need to follow his example? Prayer is such a gift, isn't it? Prayer is such a gift. But it is often the last place that we go to when we feel surrounded and feel overwhelmed, isn't it? Yes, we need to get away sometimes. It's good for us to separate ourselves and to take a break. But what we do at that time is key. And Jesus here gives us, I believe, a very important example here. That he went away, but he redeemed the time and he spent it in prayer. In prayer. Prayer is such a powerful, powerful gift that unfortunately, as modern day Christians today, we really struggle to implement fully into our lives. I came across this great quote from Stanley Jones, and I want to share it with you in its entirety because I think it's just very powerful. When he talks about the idea of prayer changing things, he said this, he said, prayer is not pulling God to my will, but the aligning of my will to the will of God. Now that's such a powerful thought right there, because so often we think of, all right, I'm going to pray and I'm going to make God do what I want him to do. No, prayer aligns our will with the will of God. Aligned to God's redemptive will, anything, everything can happen in character, conduct, and creativeness. The whole person is heightened by that prayer contact. It is in that contact I find health for my body, illumination for my mind, and moral and spiritual reinforcement for my soul. Prayer is a time exposure to God. So I expose myself to God, and he's speaking of his personal experience here, for an hour and a half to 2 hours a day, asking less and less for things and more for himself. For having him, I have everything. He gives me what I need for character, conduct, and creativeness. So I'm rich with his riches, strong with his strength, pure in his purity, and able in his ability. That's such a powerful, powerful thought. That the time in prayer that we spend going to our God gives us so much. The trouble is, and the problem is that so often for many of us, we don't spend extended time in prayer. Now, I'm not suggesting today that you need to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours a day in prayer, though would it be a bad thing? I think we really need to break up the way that we often approach prayer, which is so short and so need-based. We focus so much on what I want. And I love what he talks about here in this quote, how he says, I ask more and more for myself, and I ask more and more for him, for Christ, meaning my focus is on Jesus. My focus is on him. I want to know him more. I want to know him better. I want to implement his truths into my life. And then it gives us strength. I can certainly speak from personal experience how true this is in my own life. That when I find myself overwhelmed and unable to continue and not knowing what to do, even just simply kneeling and praying for extended periods of time, God can just heal your soul and can give you so much clarity like you never expected. But sadly, many Christians don't even attempt this. And so a challenge, I think, for all of us today is to learn from Christ that in his moment of intense pressure, he immediately went to the Father and he spent a great deal of time with the Father. You know, I don't know what it is that you're facing today. Some of you might be going through some very, very difficult and hard challenges right now. And I'm not saying that if you pray that it's going to change the situation. It's not going to pull you, snatch you out of that situation. But prayer will most certainly give you the strength and the peace and the focus to walk through that challenge. And some of you right now are nodding along with me. And you know why that is? Because you've experienced that in your life. You know what it's like to walk with the Lord in prayer. You know what it's like to saturate your heart and your mind in prayer. It is such a gift that God has given to us to communicate to him. We have his word, we learn about him, and prayer to communicate with him. And what a blessing that is, but we must avail ourselves of that gift. And so I challenge you today, if you're facing a time of trial and of difficulty, would you just maybe even this afternoon, take a block of time, find a place that you can go, find your mountain, find your hill, it doesn't mean you have to go to the mountains, okay? Just don't misunderstand me. Nothing mystical about the place. But find a spot where you can go and you can be alone. And I would encourage you to do this. Take your phone and put it somewhere else. Turn it off. Put it in a different room. Now, turn it off, then you don't hear the vibration, because we all know our phone's vibration, right? You know, we all know what that is. Put it away. Find a time and just get on your knees, get on your face before God and cry out to him. And don't make it about you, make it about him. And see if God doesn't change something in your life. He will. If you are sincere and you are genuine and you come before him, something will change. but we must dedicate our time in prayer. And that's what happened here with Jesus. He went to that mountain. He got away from the crowds. He went up there. All of this pressure was around him. He cried out to God. And I want you to notice now how Jesus came out of his time of prayer in the mountain. It brings us to our third point here in the passage, the people that Jesus chose. The people that Jesus chose. Look at verse 13. And he went up into a mountain and called unto him who he would, and they came unto him. And he ordained 12 that they should be with him, that he might send them forth to preach and to have power to heal sicknesses and to cast out devils. Now, we don't know all that God revealed to Jesus on the mountain there in prayer, but here's what we do know. He came out of that time and that night of prayer with a decisive decision. And so what was that decision? Well, it's time for me to ordain, that means set apart, call to himself 12 men who would be the ones to assist and carry on his mission even after his coming death. The next verses name for us those men, and Simon, he surnamed Peter, and James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, and he surnamed them Boanerges, which is the sons of thunder, and that's great. If you're looking for a good name for your kid, go with that, the sons of thunder. And Andrew, and Philip, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, notice, which also betrayed him. And they went into a house. Now, these are all familiar names, and over our study together, we'll most certainly explore in depth these men in future messages. But I want to look back again in closing today, verse 13 through verse 15. Notice here, first of all, he called unto him whom he would. Now, it's a simple part of this phrase here, but in it, there's so much of an understanding of what took place that day. What it declares to us is that the men that Jesus called, the ones that he chose, were the ones of the Lord's choosing. It was his sovereign decision to pick these 12 men for a far greater work than they could ever imagine. Jesus, understand, was completely uninfluenced by anything these 12 men could have said. Any plea they could have made, whether it's a positive or a negative, if one of them had promoted himself to God, or if another one had said, I have an inability, I can't even follow you, Lord, it did not make any difference at all whatsoever, because the Lord knew their hearts. You have to remember that there are many people who called themselves disciples of the Lord, but there were only 12 that he called to have this unique relationship with. And so Jesus, when he calls these 12 men, he called them with their weaknesses and with their problems. He knew that they would fail him. He was not surprised when Peter denied him. He was not caught off guard when they began to argue among themselves, as we know about later on. He wasn't like, whoa, what's happening here? No, he knew. He knew them better than they even knew themselves. And so when Jesus chose them, he assumed all responsibility for them in that moment. It's such a wonderful thing to consider that the call of God on these men's life was so specific and so pure. These guys, I don't believe that these men were, trying to get Jesus to choose them. They weren't like, pick me, like, I want to be the one. I don't believe that. This wasn't a job posting. It was a clear and it was a definite call of God on these men. And it's important for us to know that this is still how God works today. I don't think that we shouldn't move on from this portion of Scripture without being reminded of the fact that God still calls people today to serve him. He still calls people. He's still calling. And he does it in very much the same way. I'm surprisingly asked a lot from people, why are you a pastor? Some of you have asked me that question. Why are you in ministry? And sometimes if they're a non-believer, the question is why would you do that? And I don't always know if they are saying that you don't seem qualified to do it. I'm not really sure. I don't know how to take it. But often people are just curious about why someone would choose to be in full-time ministry. Some of you are maybe even thinking that right now. Why would someone want to do this? I'll tell you this, it's not for the money, just so you know, okay? But every time somebody asks me that question, I answer in the same way. Because God called me to this. There's no other reason. There's no other, this is not something, I want you to know, this is not something that I would even have chosen for myself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, because I know a lot of us, we're still getting to know each other, so I want to share a little bit of my story with you. being in ministry, what I'm doing right now, was not in my plan for my life. You know what I mean when I say that? It was not something I desired to do. Many of you know my dad's a pastor and is still a pastor. 42 years he's been in ministry, and that's an honor and just amazing when I think about it, that he's still in ministry. But growing up as a pastor's kid, being a pastor was the last thing I wanted to do. And it's not a knock on my dad. Please don't misunderstand me. My dad is ethical. He does the right thing. I mean, he is a solid guy. And I am a pastor, if I could have half of the ministry that God has given to him, I mean, I would love that. My dad's a solid guy. It's not a knock on him. It's just part of growing up in the whole thing, you know? And so for me, I was like, hey, I'm going to make money and I'm going to do these things. I had all these plans for my life. And yet, when I was 18 years old, I was at a Christian college. My parents made me go to 1 year of Christian college, and I'm thankful they did. I went to 1 year of Christian college, and in my first semester, I was 18 years old, and I was in a chapel service, and a pastor by the name of Pastor Hutchinson from a city called Kalamazoo, Michigan. Anybody know where that is? Anyway, it's a small town in Michigan. He was there, and a completely just random guy was there preaching that day, and he preached a message that I do not remember what the message was to this day. I don't know what it was that he preached about, but that entire message, as I was sitting there in my seat, God was just pounding into me, surrender, surrender, surrender. I want you to serve me. And it was I was almost having like a physical reaction in the sense, not in a weird way, but God was just so clearly speaking to me in that moment. It wasn't an audible voice. He wasn't saying, Paul, it wasn't anything like that. It was through the word, okay, by the way, through the word of God that was being preached. God used that with the Holy Spirit that was within me to agree upon within the word. As scripture tells us, the Spirit illuminates the word, and the word was illuminated in my heart, and I knew that this is what God wanted me to do. And so as an 18-year-old kid, I got up out of my seat and I went out into the lobby and I got on my face before God and I said, God, I will do anything you want me to do. I will serve you with my life. And from that point on, I knew that this is what God wanted me to do. It was a clear, definitive calling on my life. That is the only reason, and I believe it is the only reason, that someone should step into a position of ministry, is if you know that you are called. Sometimes people ask me, well, how do you know that you are called? One of the ways that I describe it is that you cannot shake it. No matter what you try to do, you cannot shake the calling of God upon your life. And so that day, I surrendered my life, I surrendered my will to my Heavenly Father. And at the time, I thought God was crazy, to be honest with you. I even said that in my prayer, do you know what you're doing right now? Because I know myself. And yet God made it so clear. And so from that moment on, that was the purpose of my life. I changed my major the next semester. I changed to a ministry degree. I even changed schools. And that just became my focus, and just step by step follow the Lord to where He led us to this point. And I'm so thankful that I have. And I'm so thankful for the life and the family and everything that God has blessed me with along the way. But I would not do it unless I was called. Even though I knew that God was, or thought that God was maybe making a mistake, God knew what He was doing. And God knew what He was doing when He called these men. He knew that He was calling men who were frail, that had shortcomings and they had failures, but He knew their hearts. And so out of all of the people that were following Jesus, He called them. And specifically, He called them, if you'll notice back again in the verse, that they would be with Him. That they would be with Him. This is more than just a descriptive term of their time with Jesus. It's a description of God's desire that all mankind would have a personal relationship with the Lord. God desires a personal relationship with us. He wants to walk alongside of us. He wants us to experience His presence. We look at these disciples, these 12 men, and we think, man, they're so fortunate that they get to spend all this time with God, but yet God gave us His Holy Spirit to be with us, to walk with us, to always be with us. For them, they had this physical representation of God in Jesus, but we have His Spirit within us. And it's because God desires that we have a personal relationship with Him, that there be this continual communication. Jesus is calling these men to a relationship. He's calling them to serve Him. He's calling them to come and be with me, be a part of what God is doing. But I want you to notice that it wasn't just a one-way relationship. Notice it says in the verse, when He called him, notice it says that they should be with Him But notice in verse 13, it says, and they came unto him. They came unto him. I love this. The call was made to them, yet there was a required response of these men. They had to say yes to his call. They needed to surrender to the will of God for their lives. They needed to be willing to let the Lord Jesus begin to shape them. Remember what he said in Mark chapter 1, verse 17? He was going to make them fishers of men. He was going to make these people and transform them into instruments in the work of God. They could not even begin to comprehend all that it was that God was going to do. But when he called them, these men were willing to say yes to the call of God. And I think this brings up a very important question for all of us today. Because as I mentioned earlier, I do believe that Jesus is still calling people. That he's calling his children, those that know him as their Lord and Savior, and he's calling them maybe to serve him in a unique and a special way. The question for us this morning is how are you going to respond to that call? How are you going to respond to that call? Are you going to dismiss it? Are you going to be so distrusting of the power of God that you would say, you don't know what you're doing, Lord, forget about it? Or would you be like these 12 that when this unique call was placed out to them, it says, and later on Peter said, we left all to follow you, Lord. That shows the decisiveness of their decision. I'm going to pursue you. I'm going to go after you. And you know what is so great? It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what you do. I love in this description of these 12 men, where they're from and all the different backgrounds that they had. It doesn't matter. If God is calling, will you surrender to him? It doesn't mean that God is calling every person in this room to be a missionary. But would it be crazy that he would call one of you to serve him? Is that something that's so unfathomable to us that out of this group of believers right here that God would call some of you to go and to live your life serving him? How amazing would that be? How amazing would that be? Don't put God in a box where it's like, he did that before, but he's not doing it now. God is still calling people. The question is your heart open and willing? Are you willing to surrender your fear and your anxiety and surrender maybe your stability? That's probably the biggest thing, right? If I surrender to God, he's gonna take, everything away from me. Would that be a terrible thing? Because all of God and nothing in this world is far better than all of this world, isn't it? The question is are you willing to surrender? Because that's what our city needs. This is what your workplace needs. They need a surrendered follower of Jesus Christ who says, God, whatever it is that you want me to do with my life, I'm willing to do it. God is calling still. Maybe some of you young people, young adults and even teenagers, God might have maybe placed that in your heart that maybe one day God could use me in a special way. He can, and he wants to do that, but he's looking for surrendered people. He's looking for surrendered people. And these men, they surrendered, and God did something pretty incredible. He delegated authority to them. I thought this was great. He gave them authority to preach, authority to heal, and authority to cast out evil spirits. That was not their authority, that was authority given to them by God. And it was a special, unique gifting on these 12 men. He was setting them aside as special, giving them unique gifts to point minds and hearts to Christ. Remember, he was still providing a sign for unbelieving Jews that they would know he was the Messiah, and these men were a part of that. In other words, these men were given or called and placed to assist the Lord with the ministry going forward, to help bear the burden, to relieve some of the pressure on his time and his physical limitations. And I think this is another great principle that we can learn from the passage here. By the way, it's not the interpretation, but it's an application that we find in here, that when we find ourselves overwhelmed and burdened, we need to seek out godly people who will help us. That's what Jesus was doing. What he told them that they're going to go do, preach, heal, and cast out, was exactly what he was overwhelmed with the day before. And now he has 12 others that are empowered to go and to help and assist him in that way. An application here for us is that when you find yourself in a season of difficulty, when you're overwhelmed and you feel like you're never going to recover, you need to seek out other people who can help you. God did not mean for life to be lived alone. Life, he in fact created us for community, didn't he? Jesus created us for community. And I'm so thankful for a local church that provides that community. I was talking with somebody recently, and they were sharing with me some struggles they were going through. And I said this to them. I said, did you know that there is 3 other people in our church that have been through the exact same thing as you, and they were like, what? And that happens so often. Why? Because we get so in ourselves, right? When we're struggling and going through difficulty, and we think there is nobody else in this entire world who understands, who's been through what I've been through. But there are. There are. Jesus, of course, has experienced it, but there's other people in this church that you can turn to and rely on, that can support you, that can give you godly advice and can help you. And so I want to encourage you, if you are finding yourself in a difficult season like that, now is not the time to isolate yourselves. Unless you're going to go pray, by the way, okay? If you're going to go isolate and pray for a bit, that's great. But then you need to find someone who can support you and encourage you. But that takes often you reaching out. Because on a Sunday when we come to church and I say, hey, how you doing? The last thing most of you do is like, Pastor, I need help. Why is that? Because in our pride, right, we want to make sure that everybody thinks everything's going okay. But God has called us to something greater, and he's provided a way for us to help one another. So one of the best things you can do is just reach out and say, hey, I need some help. Is there someone who can support me? Go to your friends. Go to people who are godly, people that you can trust. YouTube and Instagram are not great counselors. Some of you are like, wait, what? Really? No, they're not. Seek out godly people that you trust, that you know walk with the Lord. Seek out relationships. Pursue advice and counsel from godly believers. If Jesus surrounded himself with good people, so should you. So should you. What a unique passage. I hope you were tracking with me this morning. We were kind of moving around a bit, trying to find some commonality in this passage. What a unique passage. And to me, there's just so much application here. So many ways that we can be encouraged and challenged from the Word of God today. The question is how has God spoken to you today, and what are you going to do about it? How are you going to apply what you've learned this morning? There might be one thing. There might be one thought. Maybe you've never had a moment in your life where you've surrendered your heart to Jesus and said, God, whatever it is that you want me to do, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to follow your will. Maybe you're in a difficult season and you've been isolating yourself. You've not even been going to church. You've been kind of pushing things aside. You've been trying to fix it on your own, finding solutions in all different places, but you've never actually gotten down and prayed about it. Maybe today's the day that you make that decision. In whatever way God has spoken to us, it's important that we respond in the moment.